Hello everyone, welcome to another Canyon Conversations from Stokes Nature Center. My name is Patrick Kelly, I'm the Director of Education, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by Rob Soto, Scientific Illustrator. Hello Rob.
Hey Patrick, thanks for having me.
Good day.
Good day indeed.
Yeah, so we're just going to talk about scientific illustration, what it is, your approach, your inspirations. And for those of you tuning in at home, if you would like to see some of Rob's work, Rob was our artist for all of our new interpretive panels inside of the Nature Center. So feel free to go to logannature.org to reserve a time to come through and see all of that amazing work. But Rob,
Yeah,
you call yourself a scientific illustrator.
that's correct.
I have a few questions for you.
Okay.
What is science? What is illustration? And finally, what is scientific illustration and why?
So, those are all very good questions.
You will be graded.
I'm only qualified to answer one of them. Obviously science, that's how we make an understanding of the world around us. It's not the truth, it is the search for the truth. People that spend their entire lives doing that, they need help communicating their ideas to the public, and that's where scientific illustration comes in. So scientific illustration, as opposed to just illustration, is art that helps explain science. It is in one of the catchphrases is art in service of science. Like, we exist to help bring the scientific community's sometimes lofty understanding to a level that the entire world, the public, can consume and enjoy. So what I do is I talk to scientists or people trying to, like Stokes, trying to develop an idea about how do we talk to people about the ecology of the area, and I take those ideas, sometimes they're pretty complex, and I try to make it simple, unlike this response. And there's a lot to it, there's a lot to unpack. But generally, I want to take these big ideas and turn them into an image that anyone can approach, because art is universal. It is anyone of any language or any understanding of science can approach art and appreciate it.
So how does, I guess, that mission influence your perspective? Because I think about, art is, I feel like the diversity within art is like the diversity within the ocean. Like, you can have coral, you can have fish, then you can have submarines. Like,
yeah.
So
where do I fit in?
Yeah. Where do you fit in terms of your technique, and are you painting impressionistic blurs that suggest a thing, or are you? I suspect, because I already kind of know this answer. Are you very nitty gritty? You're like, no, there are this many lines and this many spots.
Yeah,
on a
so
rainbow trout.
I'm very detailed about that. I may kind of fudge how many spots are on a rainbow trout, but I'll definitely figure out what color and where you're going to find those spots, because it is, above all, graded on accuracy. If I'm not accurate, then it's not useful to the communicators or the public they're trying to reach. I have my own kind of unique style. I've been influenced. I went to undergrad at MICA, which is a very and contemporary-minded art school, especially in the illustration department, and then went to my graduate school at California State University, which has a very long history of very meticulous artwork. So I'm somewhere in between. I like drawing from nature, so a lot of my stuff is, I try to make it as accurate as possible, but I don't want to be just a camera, because that's no fun. Because there are things that you can find with science, with art, that you can't do with cameras.
Like what? Prove it. I can
Prove
take I can take a picture of something and be like, that's that.
Well, take for instance the panels we did for the Nature Center. Those are what we call flybys. So, an environment, a biome, an entire continent, however big or small you want it to be, we can get every single one of those species, every group of plants, every amphibian or bird, and get them all into the same shot. And that's not something you'll ever find in nature with a camera. You can't wait for a deer and an elk and a moose to all show up and stand next to each other in profile.
I think you need to incentivize it.
You can't interact with nature. Prime directive.
Excellent Star Trek reference.
Thank you.
So, do you ever get into a situation where you're working with a scientist and, bless their hearts, I know many, sometimes they can be overly complicated about things.
Indeed.
And you need to take some of their work and sort of shave off the, shall we say,
The excess?
the excess to get to like the actual core message. And then how do you approach that? Let's say you're working with a client who's a scientist, perhaps a paleontologist. You do a lot of paleo art.
I do.
You work oftentimes with people who are discovering and analyzing extinct species. How do you mitigate the so to speak the riffraff in their research to get to the core message?
Well, it really comes down to how it involves a lot of conversation with the scientists, and scientists being, like you said, very extreme, analytical kind of people. They may not be great at communicating their idea. So I almost have to be a pseudoscientist in order to understand what they're talking about. And it all comes back to, like you said, the core message. If I'm interested in the idea, if I can look at the image and understand, oh, okay, this is about behavior, this is about nesting behavior, or this is about, or if it's just a profile of the animal, I have two options in terms of art. I can either do, imagine a field guide image, like you would open up a nature guide to birds, and you'd have one of those profile used for identification. It's very simple. It's not even doing anything. It's kind of just, it's not even in situ. Or do I want this to be communicating a larger idea? And a lot of times it's a back and forth. I'll submit what I think is a good idea of those two options. Either it's doing something or it's just kind of there to be identified as this dinosaur, this animal. And they'll push back, and it's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer there.
So it sounds like every ecologist's favorite answer. It depends.
It depends. It really does. Yeah. Because there's so much that they want to include in the art, and it's really my job to distill it to, again, something I think that I would be interested in. I try to use myself as a buffer between them and the world, and say, I think we're getting too complex.
Here's another easy question.
Thank you.
So, art and science to me don't always have strict alignments. I feel like the perspective of scientists is often that humans are thinking animals who happen to feel, whereas the perspective from artists are that humans are feeling animals who happen to think.
Right.
How do you justify that, and how do you perhaps bring emotion to this analytical rationalism? And on the other side of things, how do you hold yourself back?
That's very hard.
Emotionally, when you have to force yourself to create something that is hyper-logical or rational. How do you balance those two worldviews and straddle sort of that burrow of ontology, if you will?
Ontology. I start with music. And I'll take all the, so for instance, the bear, Old Ephraim. That was a very emotional story for me. And my approach to it was not even to really look at any bears when I was drawing it. Obviously, I looked at more bears than you did, but
I also don't have business cards that say I'm an artist.
That's true. That's true. I'll give you a pass on that.
Mine say not artist.
Not artist,
Do
specifically.
do not expect anything but stick figures and terrible stick figures.
So I kind of, for the initial sketches, to really imbue it with emotion first, and then accuracy will come later, I just kind of draw out of my head. And music has always been a really big part of how I create art. I'll almost be composing more of a scene out of a movie or something, or a show, than actual artwork, and that helps me get motion. So for me, one of the most important things in my work is to have the opposite of a static image. I really want these animals to look like, especially the ones that are extinct, or at least extinct in a certain area, to have the movement that time has robbed them. So I really want to approach it with feeling, and then once I feel like an image is speaking to me, I'll go and like, okay, I totally got the eyes wrong. Look at as much reference material as I can, and bring a certain level of accuracy and formalism to this very emotional drawing. And I try to keep the viewer in mind most of all, like the word, especially with an interpretive panel, and if it's in a publication for a scientific journal. There'll be a lot of words there to convey all the logic and science that they want, but I want to at first appeal, like you said, really well, to the feeling heart or soul of the person looking at it. And if they can feel something about this animal that they didn't even know existed, they'll be more likely to read. I think a great example of this is with space. When's the last time like you read an article, something, or even a news blurb from NASA without a picture on it? Like, it's so technical, and all the images that they're using are little blips on a screen. And most of the images you look at, even the ones that are coming back from Mars right now, a lot of those are artist renderings because they need people to experience this, like, they need them to feel it first. And sometimes the raw images that are coming back are not, they don't have any emotion in them.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'd like to pivot a little bit to talking about sort of your history and sort of your path.
Oh boy.
Because you are a professional scientific illustrator. You are an artist, and yet you are still alive. You are able to feed yourself with a career.
I'm feeding myself a little too well, actually.
That goes against everything I was ever raised to believe about art.
Yeah.
You don't have gout. You have all of your teeth.
You
have all of your ears.
Yes.
So tell us about your journey a little bit and how you were able not only to pursue your passion, but also to make a living out of this field you decided to go into against, I won't say all of society's judgment, but certainly a lot of stereotypes out there.
There's a lot of stereotypes. Yeah, well, I was really lucky to have very supportive parents. It was actually my mom that pushed me to apply to art school. I had attempted to go to school for English, and I wasn't feeling that, so I came back home, dropped out, went to community college, and just started taking random classes. But I never stopped drawing. I've been drawing since I was very, very little, and I've been fascinated with dinosaurs almost before that. My dad gave me a Stegosaurus once, this toy. I think it was like the first time I'd really seen, it was like my first toy dinosaur. And I thought it was a monster, like a Muppet or something. I was used to fanciful animals, when you're 3 or 4. But my father said, no, this was a real thing. This was here, it was alive, and they're not here anymore. Why? We don't really know. This was like the early 90s, so we were still kind of, where'd they go? And I was fascinated by it. and the only way I could explore that fascination was to draw it, was to capture it, and I still feel that way. When I experience beauty in nature, I feel like I haven't really like dealt with that beauty until I can capture it, until I can draw it. Like taking pictures is okay, like talking about it with someone is pretty great, but when I'm confronted with beauty or mystery, I'm compelled to draw it. It's almost beyond my control. So that was sort of tamped down for a while, and then I left college, in community college, and that need started to arise again. I was starting to draw, and my mom saw this. She was like, "Hey, you're drawing. You're buying." I was buying books, how to improve, and she started leaving pamphlets and little postcards from art schools. We were lucky enough to live pretty close. We were in Maryland at the time, pretty close to MICA, which I mentioned earlier, the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, or Baltimore. You don't say the T. Yeah.
Just like in Maryland.
Just like in Maryland, yeah.
Yeah, don't pronounce the T.
No. So I applied. It was a reach for me, and I got in. And has a formal education, classically trained is the term that artists like to use. It sounds important. So figure drawing, still lifes, lots of illustration, lots of graphic design, the whole spectrum. And I started picking up a few commissions after that, started trying to hone my focus to science illustration. And I ended up getting an internship with the Marine Lab for Environmental Technologies. I'm saying that. The Institute for Marine and Environmental Technologies, that's what it is. I meant it. And was drawing for them. They were studying Atlantic menhaden, or Brevortia tyrannus.
What is that?
That's a fish.
There we go.
It's a very important fish.
What makes it important? Does it support the undersea economy?
It does.
Are there trickle-down detritus economics?
Trickle-down detritus, yeah, they're at the bottom. So they have a very important role in the trophic system, or the food chain. This is a legendary fish, supposedly the one that the Native Americans, indigenous people, use to help fertilize their crops. And this has a very important local, now modern times. We use them in a lot of pet food. We use them in a lot of, it's everywhere. It's in, your pills for fish oils or whatever. We vacuum Brevortia tyrannus out of the oceans. We don't even bother catching them anymore. So they're under a lot of strain. The ecology relies on them, and we rely on them. So this lab that I was working for, wanted to understand their gut content, because if they're such a big part and they're living in the Chesapeake Bay, which isn't the most healthy ecosystem anymore, because it's surrounded by us, they wanted to understand how it was affecting their gut content. So essentially, I spent an entire summer dissecting fish and opening up their tiny little stomachs and removing that and putting in tubes for the scientists. Meanwhile, I would draw every gut that I dissected, because they're all different. You have different sizes, male and female, and assembled kind of a collage of what all that looked like. And I loved it. Working in a lab, having gloves, using a microscope, and it was a new kind of art for me. And this was special because it was the only illustration of the gut contents of this specific species. And I loved that aspect of it. To be the first person to draw something like that. I mean, a lot of artists try to look for niches, and you just go to a scientist and say, what do you need? What doesn't exist? And they tell you. They've done all the work. So that's how I got into science illustration. And after that, I applied to a grad school in California that I mentioned, and they honed my craft even more, really trying to understand what science needs, what good science illustration is, as opposed to just good art, and sent me on my way. The rest is history.
The rest is history.
Yes. Well,
and also future.
And also future.
And potentially present.
Yes. This was only 2 years ago.
So my next question gets to a little bit of this dichotomy, the split between talent and practice, because
Ugh.
I oftentimes I'll use a sports analogy because I'm going to assume you're highly literate in sports.
Of course, naturally.
Go sports team. So oftentimes we'll see in high school or college sports a lot of athletes with a lot of talent, and then they will get drafted into, let's use football, the NFL.
Okay.
And we start to see that talent doesn't mean as much once you get to the big leagues. It's about the practice you put in, how much time you're spending reviewing the footage, the strategery, et cetera, et cetera. In the art world, we're often, we look at someone like one of the old grandmasters, like Da Vinci. Oh, the talent. You look at Michelangelo or Picasso. Oh, the talent. Oh, the talent. Why don't you like talent?
Alternatively, yeah, you look at a child or a dog that has painted something and say, whoa, the talent. That's accurate, because they haven't really had the time. But once you start assigning the word talent to a professional, it becomes a little insulting. And I'll tell you why I don't like that word. It dismisses all the years and the hours that I've put into art and honing my craft. A lot of people approach art as a kind of frou-frou sort of thing you do on your spare time, and it's fun, and it sort of just comes naturally if you're lucky. You don't need to put any work onto it, but it's incredibly intensive. And I can actually say I've spent my entire adult life, all 10 years of it, devoted entirely to art and to getting better. I keep a sketchbook with me all the time. I'm always drawing, and as a science illustrator, I'm always reading. I have to be up to date on all the scientific literature for paleo, everything that is discovered. I have to know about it. I have to understand scientific names, binomials. I have to understand the trophic system. I have to understand how evolution works and all the theories behind that. Cladistic diagrams, I have to understand how to read that and how things are related and how the tree of life and all that stuff. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. If I'm not drawing, I'm reading about something that I might have to potentially draw so that I can have the conversations with the scientists that we were talking about earlier. And none of that is talent. All of that is work. Something that stuck with me from the very first Christian Bale Batman movie, when he's sparring with Liam Neeson, and I think it's Liam Neeson.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Ra's al Ghul.
Yeah, Ra's al Ghul, and he says to him, your dad, he could have defended himself, and he's like, that's not fair. I've had training, and he says to him, it's very important. It's like training is nothing. Like the will to act is everything. And I think if you have talent, that's great. But if you don't have the will to hone that, to take it further than just natural talent, that's what's more important, because you can easily just ride the talent and even forget about it or go into a day job or anything else like that. So without the will to act on it, the will to study, then it's wasted.
Dogs are barking at chickens.
Yeah, that's also very natural. That's talent.
Exactly. They've practiced their barking at chickens.
They have.
So
I don't know if that answers your question.
yes, it does.
Okay. You have to tell me how I'm doing here, because I'm not.
It's a tacit, constant affirmation.
There you go.
If I'm not saying anything, it means you're doing great.
Fantastic. Good word use.
So I just have a few questions to wrap us up. My first question is, what is your favorite thing you've ever been commissioned to illustrate?
Well, I really loved the opportunity to draw the bison for the panel, and trees. Trees are my favorite plant to illustrate. I don't like bushes. Bushes are stupid and terrible and should burn and die because they have no structure to them. They do, but it's very messy.
I think that Mount Sinai had the same opinion.
I think so. But give me a nice pine tree. It's very logical, and love that. But my favorite commission I've ever received was a velociraptor, and this was for the Alf Museum of Paleontology for Dr. Andrew Farkey, who's an amazing paleontologist. Did a lot of work on ceratopsians, so Triceratops and their ilk. He commissioned me to do this raptor, this velociraptor. A dromaeosaur is the technical term for them. See, this is what I have to know. I put up this work. They're not called raptors. Those are like hawks and falcons. But a dromaeosaur, and he was making fun of me because it's such a popular dinosaur, and he's like, "You're never going to get another commission." Not that I couldn't get it, but he's like, "No one's ever going to ask you to draw this. They're going to be obscure. Like, this is such a..." So he was making fun of me for my first job being a velociraptor. But they needed it because they had this beautiful model done by one of their students. Very Jurassic Park and very, very out of date. And so instead of getting rid of that, they commissioned me to draw a more modern interpretation of this animal, fully feathered. We decided on the color scheme together, not on like copying a red-tailed hawk, but like, okay, where does this thing fit into in the food chain? And it's very, very similar in not only where it lives in the desert, but where it sits in the food chain as a coyote. So we modeled this feathered dinosaur after a coyote, because that makes a lot of sense to a scientist. And then you can talk about that. That's an interpretive design to talk about how animals are colored to people that come to see this. But the really cool thing was that because it was side by side with this out-of-date Jurassic Park raptor, you get an understanding of how much science has advanced just like in the past decade, which is my favorite thing about paleo art, because you're not only getting an understanding of these extinct animals, but an understanding of how we as humanity have come to grips with our place on this planet and how we interpret fossils, how we interpret evidence that we collect from the Earth itself. And if you look even further back to like the 1800s, where we thought the idea of something going extinct was not something that was even in the consciousness of people. So it's really pretty meta when you think about it. You're not just studying dinosaurs, you're studying our understanding and our coming to grips with the idea that we could go extinct.
I feel like I need like some bongos and like a beret.
I have a beret. I should go get it.
Of course you have a beret. I guess my last question for you is, maybe it's not a good last question. Maybe we'll call it the penultimate question.
Okay.
And I'll plot while you speak.
All right.
You've received a lot of commissions. You've drawn a lot of specimens. Is there a commission that you took that you were not excited about, and then you learned to love along the way? Maybe it was those intestinal tracts of those fish, or maybe it was a bush. Perhaps like some nice elderberries or something.
Oh boy.
What assignment and what work flipped your perspective of that specific organism?
I'd have to say, whenever I'm commissioned to do humans, hair, for instance, is pretty difficult. One is tempted to draw every single strand of hair, or water. So a lot of things for the Stokes Nature Center to deal with water. Or, okay, here's a good example. For the city of Nibley, I was commissioned to do a pollinator So that was a lot of flowers and a lot of bugs. These are two subjects that I do not have a lot of love for. They're beautiful. I like to observe them, but I don't like to draw them. That really turned around for me. I found immense joy in. There's something so peaceful about sitting down with a plant and not clipping it and taking it to your studio and drawing it, but to sit down with it where it's growing and just draw it over and over again. And I was in California at the time, so I could sit down with all of these plants because they're always growing. And I had so much fun studying plants. It changed my entire perspective on botanical illustration. And in drawing the insects, sometimes what helps turn my idea of my level of interest in a subject will be to not just think of it as the subject. Okay, I'm drawing a bush, I'm drawing water, boo, I'd rather be drawing a dinosaur. I try to take it a bit more technical, and I take pleasure in getting the color just right, or getting that highlight on the antenna, or suggesting the fuzz. So I really dive into the technical aspect of being an artist, and it's like, okay, I'm drawing a butterfly, a monarch butterfly, not a viceroy butterfly, which are very different, and you'll hear about it from people who know, and delighting in capturing the suggestion that there are scales on that butterfly's wing that are reflecting the light and changing their luminosity and their iridescence with the light. And what brush will get me will get that idea across to people. So that's how I've taken that lesson with me to every stream and every bush that I've been told to paint. Don't think of it as this. Enjoy the color, the shape. It gets a bit abstract there. So,
excellent. Well, my last question is potentially the most important. It's, if you could be any dinosaur, what would you be? And I want you to condense your response into one sentence in terms of justification.
Spinosaurus. Because I could eat fish all day and live in a tropical paradise.
Well, you heard it here. You heard it here first, folks. Spinosaurus is the dinosaur to be.
Spinosaurus aegypticus.
Tropical paradise.
Fish.
All the sushi.
All the sushi you could possibly want. You're big enough, no one's going to bug you.
I love it. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, Rob, thank you so much for your time
and
you, for all of your work. And for those of you tuning in on Saturday, this evening at 5:30, Rob is going to be giving a master class about his methods and his journey. Feel free to come by Stokes Nature Center. And again, if you would like to reserve a time to come and see all of Rob's art and our new interior, you can go to logannature.org.
All right.
Hasta la vista.
Getting old.
I know.
And fat.
I don't want to talk about it.